and the soda splattered. The people stared at Emmanuel's mother. Seeing Miss John that way meant it was real. They'd lost. Emmanuel's father walked away from the group, wiping his eyes, and Emmanuel felt the grinding in his chest settle to a cold nothingness. On the ride home, his father cursed. His mother punched honks out of the steering wheel. Emmanuel breathed in and watched his hands appear, then disappear, then appear, then disappear as they rode past streetlights. He let the nothing he was feeling wash over him in one cold wave after another. But now that he'd been called in for an interview with Stitches, a store self-described as an innovator with a classic sensibility that specialized in vintage sweaters, Emmanuel had something to think about besides the bodies of those kids, severed at the neck, growing damp and thick, pulsing, shooting blood. Instead, he thought about what to wear. In a vague move of solidarity, Emmanuel climbed into the loose-fitting cargos he'd worn on a camping trip. Then he stepped into his patent leather Space Jams with the laces still clean and taut as they weaved up all across the black tongue. Next, he pulled out a long-ago abandoned black hoodie and dove into its tunnel. As a final act of solidarity, Emmanuel put on a gray snapback cap, a hat similar to the ones two of the Finkelstein Five had been wearing the day they were murdered, a fact George Wilson Dunn's defense had stressed throughout the proceedings. Emmanuel stepped outside into the world, his blackness at a solid 7.6. He felt like Evel Knievel at the top of a ramp. At the mall, he'd looked for something to wear to the interview, something to bring him down to at least a 4.2. He pulled the brim of his hat forward and down to shade his eyes. He walked up a hill toward Canfield Road, where he'd catch a bus. He listened to the gravel scraping under his sneakers. It had been a very long time since he'd had his blackness even close to a 7.0. "I want you safe. You gotta know how to move," his father had said to him at a very young age. Emmanuel started learning the basics of his blackness before he knew how to do long division. Smiling when angry, whispering when he wanted to yell. Back when he was in middle school, after a trip to the zoo, where he'd been accused of stealing a stuffed panda from the gift shop, Emmanuel had burned his last pair of baggy jeans in his driveway. He'd watched the denim curl in ash in front of him with unblinking eyes. When his father came outside, Emmanuel imagined he'd get a good talking to. Instead, his father stood quietly beside him. "This is an important thing to learn," his father had said. Together they watched the fire until it ate itself dead. It was crowded at the bus stop. He felt eyes shifting toward him, while pocketbooks shifted away. Emmanuel thought of George Wilson Dunn. He imagined the middle-aged man standing there in front of him, smiling, a chainsaw growling in his hands. He decided to try something dangerous. He turned his hat backward so the shadow of the brim draped his neck. He felt his blackness leap and throb to an 8.0. The people grew quiet. They tried to look super friendly, but also distant, as if he were a tiger or an elephant they were watching beneath a big tent. A path through the mass opened up for Emmanuel. Soon, he was standing near the bench. A young woman with long brown hair and a guy wearing sunglasses above the brim of his hat both remembered they had to be somewhere else. Immediately. An older woman remained sitting, and Emmanuel took the newly available seat beside her. The woman glanced toward Emmanuel as he sat. She smiled faintly. Her look of general disinterest made his heart sing. He turned his hat forward and felt his blackness ease back to a still very serious 7.6. A minute later, the brown-haired woman returned and sat beside him. She smiled like someone had told her that if she stopped smiling her frantic, wide-eyed smile, Emmanuel would blow her brains out. The fact